This is a keyframe. It's the key to the kingdom, the center of the universe, the One Ring, das Rheingold, and it's the key to all of After Effects power. In this episode of How To Video, we'll show you how something so simple can do so much. Adobe After Effects is a digital visual effects, motion graphics, and compositing application. It can be used for graphics and titles like lower thirds, or opening title sequences like we run before our Cheers livestream series. It has tracking tools so you can track graphics onto something in the footage, and it's used for compositing, which just means laying elements over one another so they look like they're in the same scene, like we did in our Halloween video. Since we only have a few minutes, we're not going to learn all that right now. Instead, we'll start with a tour and go over the basics. When you first open After Effects, you'll see this dialog asking whether you want to open a project or create a new one. We have an example project for this tutorial you can download from our blog. Take a minute to do that and we'll open it here. For those of you who use Premiere Pro, this workspace will look a little familiar. Sort of. On the top left is the project panel with all of our footage, elements, and compositions organized into folders however we like. To the right of that is where we view our work. Down on the bottom is our timeline viewer. And way over here to the right is a long list of tabs for just about everything from effects and presets, tools for alignment, text, a tracker to do that hand thing you saw earlier, and a ton of other stuff. You'll see a list of compositions and objects here. Think of compositions like sequences in Premiere Pro. To create your own, go up here and select New Composition. In the settings, you'll need to set the resolution, aspect ratio, and frame rate to match the video project you're building your graphics for. The last thing to set is the length of your composition. A lot of times you can just guess. You can always trim what you export, so choose a length that gives you enough space to play, so to speak. For now, we're going to look at one of the compositions we've already created, so I'll cancel out of this and open the one called Lower Thirds Animation. Now we can drag the playhead on the timeline and see our composition. Don't believe what our graphics guru Sarah did here. I am definitely not an After Effects wizard. Anyway, down here you'll see all the different layers on the timeline. We can toggle them on and off here. You can move layers around, cut them, trim them. A lot of things you can do in Premiere. You just tend to do less of it in After Effects, and we'll show you why. Ignore all these options for now, we'll go over some of them in a bit. Spacebar plays your animation, though animations can be big complicated things, so the more you have going on, the less you'll be able to play in real time. Here's an example of that. You can help things along by choosing a lower quality playback here, or by hitting spacebar and waiting as it renders frame by frame, and populating this green line up here that shows you what's available preloaded and able to view in real time. Back to our lower thirds project. To see what's going on with each of these layers, twirl this down and then twirl down transform. And look, our keyframes in their natural environment. Aren't they beautiful? This is where the magic happens. Notice to the left are all the parameters we can change, like position, scale, rotation, and opacity. And the keyframes tell us when and where our object will land on each of these parameters. Notice both shapes start out to the left, and the name banner lands right here on this keyframe, while the title banner takes a few more frames to land. Let me show you how to place keyframes, and we'll do this by animating this lower thirds back out of frame, farther down our timeline right around here. First, let's see how long the initial animation took so we can mimic that. I'll put the playhead at one of our keyframes and press Command forward arrow to advance through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 frames. Great, we'll do the same thing for the ending. First, we choose a place for the animation to start and click here to make a new keyframe. Once you have a keyframe in any given parameter, you can create another one for that parameter just by changing the parameter. So we'll go 12 frames over, slide our box out of frame, and the keyframe will automatically create itself. To make things easier, we just created these keyframes at the same spot for both layers, but notice our transition is 1, 2, 3 frames offset. So we'll do the same thing here by highlighting the keyframes and dragging them over until we like what's happening. Now let's look at 3 things that make this animation really powerful, and that aren't really possible in Premiere. First, notice the motion blur going on. I'll punch in a little for a better look. First by hitting Command plus to zoom, then by holding down spacebar to get our hand tool and move around the composition. Over here you'll see where you can toggle motion blur on and off. If we remove it, this is how animations happen in Premiere, and it looks pretty choppy. After Effects allows you to smooth these movements with a more natural blur. Second, these keyframes aren't just your run-of-the-mill vanilla keyframes. I can show you what one of those looks like by creating a new keyframe in the scale parameter. Notice it's a different shape than the others. Now, if we right-click it, we can choose Easy Ease, and it'll become the same shape as the others. This unlocks a hugely powerful tool to ease the motion of your animations so they don't just start and stop abruptly and awkwardly. Let me get rid of that keyframe just so it doesn't clog up our composition. Let's dig in so we can actually see what's happening once we ease a keyframe. We do this by selecting the parameter we want to view and clicking the Graph Editor button. Now, down here, this button will fit the graph into our view. Now you get a visual representation of how our animation is moving. Notice it starts fast and eases itself into place towards the end. On the outro animation, we'd want the opposite to happen. So we can click on one of these keyframes, and notice here there are handles that let you grab and form the flow of the motion. So we'll change the graph so our animation eases back out for both of our layers. We'll get back out of the editor mode, and you can see this happen. This tool really lets you create very smooth organic motions. The third thing I want to show you is, well, check out what's happening when our text animates in. There's nothing in our timeline controlling that bit of magic, and that's because these two layers in our composition are themselves compositions. If I double click on one of them to open it, you can see there's a whole other text reveal going on in here, totally independent of our lower thirds composition. You can build out animations in their own comps, and then insert those comps into other comps, layering the animations together. This gives you so many options. Now that we're here, let me show you another really powerful tool that makes After Effects worthwhile. It's happening in the text reveal animation here. For this effect, the text stays where it is, and we've added a mask to it, which you can do by right-clicking the layer and choosing Mask, New Mask. Now, the only thing that's visible is what the mask covers. We see the mask's keyframes here. As the mask moves away, the text is hidden. Once you have these basics down, you can do so much. Let's look at this triangle animation comp, and you'll get an idea for how more complicated keyframing can make objects come to life. Here, we have a shape that moves around, does some tricks, and disappears. If we twirl down and reveal what's going on, we can read these keyframes like reading a bit of sheet music, really. Let's start at the beginning. We have position and opacity keyframes as our triangle appears and moves to a stop here. Its position goes from left to right, and its opacity goes from 0% to 100%. Then our scale keyframes take over for a little while. Here, things get a little crazy. That's because our rotation keyframes come in. And if we check out our graph editor, you can see they speed way up in the middle, creating that twirling effect. It ramps up, ends here at one complete turn, and then at the end with one more turn that takes much longer to complete. So far, also, we've been looking at speed graph that shows you the speed at which the animation's going. So here will be almost 20 thousandths of a second, and here is barely noticeable. But you can also look at the value graph that will show you your point A to point B. In this case, I think the value graph is a better example. You can see things ramp up here, and then that second complete turn ends up being pretty gradual. But then there's this whole shape-changing situation we have going on here. Let's get out of the graph editor and take a look at that. Since this is a shape layer, we can see it's set to star shape. And these keyframes change its shape from 3 points here to 10 points here. And finally, our 10-point star bounces out of frame with some position keyframes. And it looks like here at the end, some opacity keyframes again. Okay, that was a lot in a little time, but you can learn a ton by studying this and other After Effects projects that are already built. Start by editing them, drag some keyframes around, change their velocity in the graph editor, and see what's possible. Once you have something you like, it's time to export. Let's do that with our lower thirds animation. We'd export this entire composition, but if you wanted to trim one, I'll zoom out here, and you can see at the end, this is where you would trim it, just like in and out points in Premiere. Then we export either by going up here to export, add to render queue, or by hitting Command-Control-M. Your render queue is down here and replaces your timeline. This tab is always here. So you can look at your other timelines and go back into your render queue to see what's there anytime you need to. This link brings up things like resolution and frame rate. And this one lets you choose what kind of video file it'll be. Mostly we export these as animation files. And here's one very important point. Even if your project has no background, there's only one way to get it to export without a blank background that fills the frame, and that's by exporting an alpha layer. You can only do this as an animation file and by going to RGB and changing it to RGB plus alpha. That adds the alpha layer. You want to make sure to do that, otherwise your lower thirds animations will come out like this, instead of like this. And this dialog lets you choose the name and location of your export. Then hit Enter or Render here to the right. In our last episode on Premiere, we went over keyboard shortcuts pretty early on because they're so important from day one using Premiere. But After Effects is a different animal, and at first it's better to do things the slow way, so we didn't really use shortcuts. But as you gain proficiency, you'll want them to speed up your workflow, so we've included a handy cheat sheet for when you're ready. A lot of people are deathly afraid of After Effects, which is too bad because it leads them to do a lot of light animation in apps like Premiere that aren't really made for it. We're not After Effects wizards or professionals at it. Those people are specialists, but we use it almost daily, and hopefully this tutorial will help you get the basic understanding that'll make you fire up After Effects the next time you have to do a simple animation. Your video projects will look more professional, and trust me, your knowledge and comfort of the app will grow really quickly. Let us know how it's going, and make sure to subscribe for more episodes of How To Video. Thanks for watching.